it's time to start with something very interesting. And there's no better way to begin on my channel. These courses on the first move d4 to begin with nothing else but the Queen's Gambit itself. So it begins with d4, d5, and c4. So when somebody asks you what the Queen's Gambit is, this is the Queen's Gambit. And I'm going to especially give this lecture to chess beginners and guys who are just, let's just say, new for chess. It's gonna be a pretty short one, and I'm going to show you like 5 most basic and absolutely crucial tactical tricks in the Queen's Gambit. So after c4, they take on c4. The usual question is, how can we get the pawn back? And why do we usually give up this pawn? We play e3. Seemingly, we just want to capture this pawn back by bishop c4. And they have a couple of moves. But amongst these possibilities, e5, b5, c5, and knight f6, b5 is considered to be the most logical one, especially on low levels, because black players don't want to give up these pawns and they just play b5. And one might think, oh, look, how are we going to get the pawn back? You just play a4. Why do you have to play a4? Because you need to break this pawn chain. And when you play a4, literally the only move for black here is b4, believe it or not. So what's going to happen if they play c6? Here we go. The first trick is coming. After a takes b5, c takes b5, boom, queen comes to f3. Worst case scenario, for us, we're about to win the knight. Otherwise, we're just going to take this rook on a8, and the rook cannot be defended. So I said in the worst case scenario, we're gonna just win the knight, because when they play knight c6, you just take the knight, and the rest of the game you'll be able to play up a piece, and I believe it should be enough for you to win the game. If instead of c6, they go for bishop d7, then you just take on b5, and you already should be very happy because you just managed to break the pawn structure, the pawn chain, and to weaken the c4 pawn. In one of the games was bishop b5, knight c3, and now we can see like 2 moves. One game was played by Kasparov, and another game was played in London like 200 years ago. I'm going to show you the first one that is more attractive. This guy played and put a bishop back on a6. White played queen f3 once again, threatening the rook on a8. The only possibility for them to defend this rook is c6. For all of you who are like good players or just good with tactics, find a move. Look at the funny way of finishing black off. Rook takes a6. So white sacrifices in exchange, but for the time being, it's gonna be actually for like temporarily 2 moves. He's just going to be down in exchange. After knight takes a6, he takes on c6. And look at this, attacking knight, king, and rook. Only defense is to cover himself by the queen. And when he does that, you take on a8. He has to put the queen back. You once again give check, and he once again has to defend the queen, and the guy took on a6. This is how a game, a guy whose name is Serrat, beat somebody in London back to 1880. And when you play like b5, a4, bishop d7, a takes, bishop takes, knight c3, Kasparov's opponent played c6. Kasparov played against some computer elite in Germany back to 1985 like this, and certainly doesn't have any concrete winning options. But Kasparov played b3, trying to undermine the position of the pawn on c4 and the bishop on b5. Computer played e6, b takes e6, c4, bishop a6, and played knight f3. Then played bishop to d3, went for a short castle, and played e4. with an open rook on a file, constant pressure on the bishop on a6 and pawn on a7, inability for black to develop that knight to d7, with the idea of doing the fork with e5, with such a strong center and this pawns being stretched from c4 to e4, you can see the difference between computers back to 80s and nowadays. Nowadays, you cannot even imagine that any player can challenge any computer. They are like so strong. Kasparov was already winning in, well, what is also important to understand here, the meaning and importance of the center. That's why I always keep telling my students, beginners, guys, you have to care about three most important things. Center, so it's centralization, activity, and development. And that's what I call CAD rule. Centralization, activity, development. If your moves fulfill all these three conditions, your move is gonna be just great. I showed you already like two traps. Let's take a look at the third one. They gotta go with c5. For example, some of these guys play c5, so they don't want to defend the pawn, but they play c5. You, of course, take on c4. They go with c takes d4 to create your double pawn. You don't react and play knight f3. Imagine those who just think that, oh, this is good. I just want a pawn. Let me just take another one. Bishop takes f7. You use the typical way of deflection. Deflecting this king from the queen means that the queen takes on d8 and they lose it. Another trick. You play knight f3, and instead of taking on e3, they just say, okay, I'm not gonna take there. I'll play bishop g4, trying to complete my development and develop one more piece. This is another basic tactics. You go with bishop f7, and after king f7, you go knight g5. Another nice trick. You get a piece back. You already won the pawn. You broke the castle, and the game, just like you see, is easily winning. Then a fourth trick in these positions, actually already fifth trick, could be e5. This is considered to be absolutely the best of all these possibilities because it challenges the center and creates an isolated pawn. You take on c4, they take on d4, and play bishop d6. You play knight f3, knight f6. You complete development, they do the same. Of course that you can play knight, but there is a very annoying bishop g4 threat by black. So you play h3, and now you have the same type of threat here. They play h6. As soon as you see in your game that your bishop is open, that this one is going on this diagonal, that you have this knight, immediately put the queen on d3. Maybe you don't even see the point, but I'll show you the game between Williams and Brown, played in Bristol back to 1844. After knight c6, White played one very nice, kind of risky move because it doesn't turn out to be the best, because he could have taken on h6 and the game would be a little bit better for black. But he just played knight b4. Take a look at the finish of this game. So this is like a nice trick. If g takes h6, he would just come up with this check, and after this take on h6, and he was probably counting that in this position he could carry on with the action. After bishop d3, they have to play f5, and so on and so on. Although black has enough defensive resources in this position. But the guy played knight to b4. White took advantage of this bishop on c4 and having this bishop on h6, and played queen g6. Look at this nice tactics. Pawn cannot take because the king is pinned, and you just threatened to mate on g7 in one move. After knight e8, he resigned after knight g5. Just like you see, within a small amount of time, I just showed you like the 5 most popular and basic tricks in the Queen's Gambit. Hope you enjoyed this one. And finally, let me just show you how is black supposed to play when they take like this. They have to develop the knight. You take on c4. You always want to play knight f3, and on any bishop g4, bishop f7, so they should go with e6. Temporarily, they close this bishop, but they will solve its problem with a6, c5, and b5. When you play knight f3, c5, castles a6, ya6 to play b5 and to solve the problem of the light square bishop with the bishop e7. Of all the possible moves, and there are like plenty of possibilities for white, Kasparov and Kramnik went always for bishop to b3. That turns out to score the best for white, and that's another story for like higher rated players and in the future your opponents.